Are you a disabled veteran that's currently service-connected for a mental health disorder, whether it be PTSD, depression, anxiety disorder, whatever, and you want to see how you can increase your rating? Then you're in the right spot. I'm going to talk to you about how you can get your claim for an increased rating approved, how you can qualify even for up to 100% rating, and also get entitled to benefits under a total disability rating for unemployability. Let's talk about it. Okay, before I get into what you came here for today, I have to put out the disclaimer. Although I'm an attorney, I'm not your attorney. So if you actually need representation in any of your claims, I cannot represent you. Any information I give you on this channel is for purely informational purposes and does not constitute an attorney-client relationship. So that we got that out the way, let's jump into how you can get your increased rating approved for a mental health disorder. Okay, let's start with the basics. So as I mentioned before, this is a video about increasing your rating for an already service-connected mental health disorder. I won't talk about how you get service-connected. That's a whole nother video and takes a whole nother time to talk about. These are only for people who are currently service-connected for a mental health disorder and are looking to get their ratings increased based on increased symptoms that affect their social or occupational impairment. So let's talk about that. So if you watch my other video about how to get your claims approved, I talked to you about this book called The Federal Veterans Laws, Rules, and Regulations. And this book is available online, but I like the hard copy. The book has the United States Code in here that applies to veterans law, and it also has the regulations. And basically what regulations are VA's interpretation of the United States Code. In the regulations, what VA has done is said, for certain mental disorders, we contemplate these to be the mental disorders, and these are the corresponding ratings for the mental disorders. So let's start out with, what are the ratings available for mental health disorders? I see often in my everyday work that veterans sometimes ask for ratings that are not even available for mental health disorders. So let's look at the general rating formula for mental health disorders. It ranges from a 0, a non-compensable rating if you have a mental condition, but the symptoms are not severe enough to interfere with your social or occupational functioning, then you get a 0%. The next level up is 10. The next level up from that is 30, 50, 70, and 100. So I often see sometimes veterans say, I want to get approved for a higher rating, and I think I'm entitled to, let's say, a 40% rating. Based on what I just told you, 40% is not a rating that's available for mental health disorders under the code for regulations. So be mindful of when you're asking for a rating, make sure that you're contemplating what the rating that is actually available for you. Okay, so the next tip in getting your increased rating approved is to have evidence of occupational and social impairment that's due to whatever the rating that you want to be entitled to. All of them list certain examples. Just to be clear, whatever examples they list does not mean that you have to have all these things present in order to be entitled to that rating. I'll give you an example. For the 70% rating, it says you need to have occupational and social impairment with deficiencies in most areas, such as work, school, family relations, judgment, thinking, or mood, due to symptoms such as suicidal ideation, obsessional rituals which interfere with routine activities, speech, illogical speech, things of that nature. This does not mean that you have to go through each symptom and say, do I have it or not? And if I don't qualify for a 70% rating. What it merely does is give the raters an opportunity to say, these are the type of symptoms that should be present if a veteran suffers from occupational and social impairment with deficiencies in most areas. What I often see is that veterans say they suffer from problems. And sometimes it's at home with their family life or their friends, and sometimes it's at work, and sometimes it's at both. So distinguishing where the deficiencies happen is important into saying, this is why I feel like I should be entitled to this rating. I want to give you a tip. What I often would suggest people, if you want to qualify for the highest rating, to gather as much information from your workplace if you're working, from your family and friends to give evidence that this person is very hard to work with. Let's say your spouse said that you've changed. Things of that nature are probative evidence that this person has severe symptoms. Everybody that has PTSD or depression or anxiety symptoms are not severe. They may seem severe to you, but they're probably not severe when it comes to rating on the rating schedule. So keep that in mind. As I mentioned earlier, there is a 100% rating available for mental health disorders. I personally don't see it as often. What I normally see is perhaps a person gets a 70% rating and also gets a Tdiu rating. And Tdiu stands for Total Disability Rating Based on Unemployability. And so in order to be qualified for it, you have to have a certain amount of disabilities and they have to be rated at a certain amount to get the Tdiu. And usually I see a 70% rating with the Tdiu. It's very rare that I see a 100% rating for a mental health disorder. Those cases are very severe. I'll give you an example for 100% rating, total occupational and social impairment due to symptoms such as gross impairment in thought processes or communication, persistent delusions or hallucinations, grossly inappropriate behavior, persistent danger of hurting self or others. These are the things that you would have to show similar symptoms in order to qualify for a 100% rating. So oftentimes I see this perhaps for people who have been in inpatient hospitalization due to their mental health disorder symptoms. They're in and out of the hospital, inpatient procedures, with treatment. And those are the people that usually qualify for those 100% ratings. They are usually on suicide watch. They have threatened people to kill people. They cannot function at home. They barely take care of themselves. They barely bathe. They barely can take care of their basic duties. They definitely cannot work. They don't leave the house. Those kind of symptoms are the symptoms I usually see for someone that qualifies for a 100% rating. As I mentioned, it's not impossible. I just don't see it as often. Usually I see, like I said, the highest would be 70% rating, and they also say they can't work, which entitles them to also a Tdiu rating. And I'll talk a little bit more about how you qualify for Tdiu, but we're going to keep talking about how you get an increased rating for PTSD, and then we'll get into Tdiu. One popular symptom that many people with mental disorders suffer is difficulty sleeping. And sometimes they feel that they're entitled to a rating for insomnia and for their mental health disorder. And what usually happens is VA sends the veteran for an exam, a VA examination, and asks the examiner to say whether the veteran's symptoms of inability to sleep is a separate disability outside of the mental health disorder, such as like insomnia, which is a whole nother rating, or if it's one of the symptoms of the mental health disorder, and usually it's rated within there. So keep in mind that there may be some overlapping. You cannot, what they call is pyramiding. You cannot be entitled to compensation for the same symptom more than once. So if you already have PTSD and insomnia or difficulty sleeping is a part of that symptom, you cannot also be rated for insomnia if the insomnia is not due to, if the insomnia is due to the PTSD or mental health disorder, it cannot be rated separately. If it's insomnia because of some other reason, then you perhaps could get it rated under a separate rating. But oftentimes the difficulty sleeping is part of the rating for the mental health disorder. Okay, so I mentioned that you also can qualify potentially for a Tdiu rating, a total disability rating based on unemployability. And in order to qualify for Tdiu, you either have to, if you have one disability, it has to be rated at least 60% disabling, or if you have more than one disability has to be rated at least 40% disabling, and the other disabilities have to combine to meet 70% disabling for all your disabilities. Watch my other video if you haven't already about how VA combines ratings. They don't add the ratings up, they combine them. But if you have multiple disabilities, you have to have the combined rating of 70%. If you only have one disability, it has to be rated at minimum 60% disabling. And once you meet those qualifications, you have to have proof that your disability or disabilities preclude you from maintaining and sustaining substantially gainful employment. So this can mean whatever the disabilities do, the symptoms of those disabilities would not allow you to maintain work. And work is they define it as substantially gainful employment because it can't be marginal work. It can't be part-time work that you can barely live off of, work that pays you below the poverty level. It can't be in a family business where if you work somewhere else, no one would allow you these accommodations. These are the things that VA looks for to say whether you as a veteran will be qualified for a TDIU. Another thing that VA considers when they're considering your TDIU claim is they make you fill out a form called the VA 21-8940. And basically on the form, you fill out things like where you last worked in the last 5 to 10 years, what were you doing, what's the last time you worked, what's your highest level of education, do you have any other specialty education or trainings? And VA takes that information and says, okay, based on the veteran's training and previous trainings, would he or she be qualified for a job? Even if it's not the same job you're doing now, you're not guaranteed to have to do that job. But if you have the possibility of being trained or trainable in another field, could you do that job? And oftentimes what I see with the mental health disorders, what that happens is their doctors or psychiatrists or therapists say, this person cannot work with other people. They need to work by themselves because they don't get along with other people, and that will be a problem. Could they do another job? So then that's when we look at the VA 21-8940 and say, what were they doing in the past? Have they done other jobs that didn't require them to work with people? Have they worked the same job for 30 years and the likelihood of them being able to do another job would be slim to none? They may qualify for TDIU. What I usually also see is perhaps they can't work in this particular field, but they have, let's say, a bachelor's degree and they can work in a field where it doesn't require too much customer contact or even other contact. Then that may be saying, okay, then you don't qualify for TDIU because there are other jobs that even considering your mental health disorder symptoms, you could do. Sometimes I see people say, I can work as, let's say, maintenance, and I can do overnight because I don't have to deal with much people and they've done similar activities in the past, then that person would not qualify for entitlement to TDIU. What your job and whoever is representing your job is to pull out information that says basically this person can't do any other work. Sometimes, usually it's more than one disability. So let's say they can't work in a field that requires customer contact or people contact kind of thing. But then they also have some disability that precludes them from doing other kind of physical activities. So then it kind of limits the possibilities of what they're actually qualified to do. And then that makes the case for entitlement to TDIU more likely, that you would actually be qualified for it. TDIU makes it entitled to higher benefits than you would otherwise be entitled to. Usually you're entitled to educational benefits if you have dependents, so that it's an additional ancillary benefits to have TDIU ratings. So many people go for those ratings. A lot of attorneys who represent veterans want to have their veterans get that kind of rating because they know that's the maximum benefit usually on that level. Here's another tip. Keep in mind if you're trying to qualify for TDIU and you have other non-service connected disabilities, VA will not consider those disabilities in their consideration of whether you qualify for TDIU. A lot of times veterans have a lot of things going on, and yes, they have these disabilities that are service connected, and then they may have like a major disability that's not service connected. Let's say they suffered a stroke. The stroke has not been deemed to be service connected, but it could preclude them from working. If there are no independent reasons why, other than this stroke, that the veteran cannot work, then the veteran would not qualify for TDIU. There has to be something in the service-connected bunch that says, I cannot work. If the stroke also is one of the reasons why you can't work, that's fine, but there has to be independent reasons of the stroke that will qualify you for TDIU. Otherwise, VA cannot consider the non-service connected disabilities when they're trying to make the decision whether you're employable or not. Dealing with a mental health disorder is no easy job, and we thank the veterans for their service. We thank their family and friends that support them through service and even post-service while they're dealing with these mental health disorders. And hopefully, if you are eligible for an increased rating and you listen to the tips that I previously said, you will qualify for those ratings. I want to give you another tip. If you forgot perhaps to say that I want to file the VA 21-8940, but you mentioned at some point during your claim that you can't work, it's okay, because the Tdiu claim is attached to any increased rating claim that you file, and VA will take it upon themselves to actually evaluate you to see whether you qualify for Tdiu. So if you have any other questions, put them below. If there's any other topics you want me to discuss about veterans law, comment below as well.